Wizards of the Coast has just issued a brand new banned and restricted announcement. Now, this announcement focuses specifically on Pauper, and multiple cards have been banned in the format.
The Magic Historian.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well. We are here to talk about the September 8th, 2021 banned and restricted announcement. This announcement only affects the Pauper format, and there are two cards that are being banned. The first is Chatterstorm. Chatterstorm is 1 green and 1 for a sorcery that says create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. It's got Storm, which is what makes this card actually pretty powerful. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. The flavor text says, friends, foragers, fuzzy fighters, tonight we're after more than just acorns. And that's Laryl, the deep forest hermit. And I do so love the comedic concept of giving a rousing pre-battle speech to a big old squad of squirrels. And the idea of calling like a huge squad of squirrels a Chatterstorm is also awesome. You see here in the foreground of the artwork, you have a squirrel that is posing in like an anime ninja way. Like it looks like he's got like a beefy arm and it's like, you have made the wrong choice. Fist of the North Star. You're already dead. You just don't know it. I love it. So you've got him in the foreground, and then the background, you start to count them out. You're like, there are a lot of squirrels in this artwork, right? Like I counted at least 14, 15 to begin with. If you sat down and probably picked it apart and figured out everyone that's in there without the glowing eyes, there would be more. But this is a crazy amount of squirrels, more than enough to lay even gigantic Eldrazi like Emrakul low. So that is one of the two cards that's being banned. The other card that's being banned is Sojourner's Companion. This is a 7 casting cost artifact creature with the salamander subtype, or creature type, not subtype, whatever. Salamander creature type. It has affinity for artifacts, and if you're not familiar with that ability, affinity for artifacts makes the spell cost 1 less for every artifact you have out. So the idea behind cards like this is you want to have so many artifacts out that you can just play it for free or for 1 or 2 mana. Because admittedly, it is just a 4/4 when it's out with no special abilities, but the point is how easy and effective it is to cast. And on top of it, it has artifact land cycling too, so you can pay 2 mana, discard it from your hand to go and get an artifact land and put it into your hand. Not too shabby. Artifact land cycling is only existing on this one particular card in all of Magic. The flavor text says, before Phyrexia's corruption, many of Mirrodin's creatures were more curious than cruel. So originally, when Mirrodin was created, Karn created it as this sort of metal paradise for a golem to live in. But unfortunately, due to the Phyrexian oil that Karn transported with him, Mirrodin ended up getting corrupted into new Phyrexia. So this is basically a blink back in time where we get to see, hey, here's a denizen of the world before Phyrexia ruined it. Pretty neat. Pretty neat indeed. So basically, we're going to dive into the actual announcement now, and I'll put up the cards that are referenced as we go through it. All right, so this basically takes effect starting today. And the article explaining it says, Modern Horizons 2 introduced many new high-impact cards to Pauper. And I have to say, that's actually an excellent thing. When it comes to Magic the Gathering, especially with regular standard sets and stuff like that, a lot of the commons and uncommons are specifically designed for draft in a particular environment. And as a result, almost all of the commons that are made in any given set aren't particularly good. Now, yes, Pauper's power level is overall a lower power level because you're only dealing with common cards. But it is felt like there is barely any attention paid to the Pauper crowd, which doesn't feel fair. Just because you're somebody who wants to focus on the commons of Magic the Gathering doesn't mean you should just kind of be ignored and like, look, if you're not buying our expensive products, then we don't really care. Stop using the cheap cards, play with the expensive cards. So I do like that Wizards made the choice with Modern Horizons 2 to introduce more cards that have a genuine ability to make a difference for Modern, because a lot of stuff, not Modern, Pauper. I'm not used to talking about Pauper very frequently. So, anyways, to continue with what it says. Modern Horizons 2 introduced many new high-impact cards to Pauper, and we've been watching the metagame absorb and adapt to those additions over the last several weeks. In that time, Storm and Affinity decks have risen to occupy a large share of the metagame. We've heard community feedback that metagame pressures from Storm and Affinity have pushed out a variety of other deck options that were previously viable. I wonder if they're talking about the community feedback, the fact that there was like a mini protest, we're going to register basic land decks to kind of say that Pauper is overpowered. I don't know if you guys heard about that. I don't know how much that actually impacted Wizards. I don't know if this is a quick response to something like that, or if it's been brewing for a while and Wizards has finally said, okay, let's step up and fix the changes that have happened in Pauper with Modern Horizons 2. I'm not 100% sure. It's difficult because you can't get, the inside information from the company. But let us continue. In recent weeks, Storm combo decks had the highest non-mirror match win rate among top decks and earned by far the most 5-0 performances in Magic Online League. So just clean sweeping, going absolutely undefeated. These decks used fast mana to power out a large Chatterstorm, often in combination with First Day of Class. So this is First Day of Class. 1 red and 1 for an instant that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. It also does have Learn, where you can grab a lesson from outside the game or discard a card to draw a card, but ultimately that is just the icing on the cake. The cake itself is the main ability of the card, because what you do is you cast a Chatterstorm for what? If you get 10, 15 of these different counters, as 1/1s, they're not enough to win the game. But now, all of these Chatterstorm tokens, once you cast First Day of Class, all of a sudden they're running around going, I'm late for chemistry! And somehow that means they get a +1/+1 counter and haste. So now, all of a sudden, you're creating bear-level squirrels, and they can send in as like a squad. 10 of them, if your opponent has no creatures out, 10 of them is sufficient to do full 20 points of damage and just win the game. Now, obviously, you have to have Chatterstorm and First Day of Class together at the same time. However, in total, you only need 4 mana to cast those 2 spells, along with all of your other stuff you're casting to go storm crazy, right? So these aren't expensive cards in terms of casting cost, and obviously not in terms of money-wise either, because that's kind of the point of Pauper, right? Keeping things cheap. So, as it says, the decks use fast mana to power a large Chatterstorm, often in combination with First Day of Class, to create an insurmountable board state. I mean, look at it. Look at these squirrels. This is just them as 1/1s, right? Make them 2/2s, send them in. What are they going to do? So, it either creates an insurmountable board state, or even wins the game on the spot. So, if it's not enough to win, if your opponent just generates 8, 10 2/2s, what are you supposed to do? They're just going to swing in with them, and in a couple turns, you're done for, right? Like, what are you supposed to do? Given the limitations of the Pauper card pool, many decks struggle to interact with this win condition. Therefore, to address Storm's high win rate, high metagame share, and difficulty to interact with, we are banning Chatterstorm. I mean, Storm cards are always playing that dangerous game in the first place, where it's like, okay, what are we doing here? You don't see them printing like good, rare Storm cards in Standard or anything like that, because Storm is just too easy to go absolutely nuts with, right? So it says, we considered banning Galvanic Relay as well, and this is Galvanic Relay. 1 red and 2 for a sorcery. Exile the top card of your library. During your next turn, you may play that card. And this one has Storm. So like I just said, Storm can be a huge problem, which is why they were eyeing Galvanic Relay. Oh, what's the flavor text say? Abandoned years ago, the experiment continues to iterate upon itself. Oh, that's cool. So the idea is this is an is it experiment using lightning, and then basically it just keeps going on forever, or it's just been going on for so long. They're just like, okay, you know what, we can't control this, we can't deal with this, let's just move on. And meanwhile, it keeps blasting over and over and over. So they said, we considered banning Galvanic Relay as well, but our hope is to allow players to experiment with slower, lower powered versions of the deck. Additionally, we've seen the card being used in other contexts where it's more about generating value than winning the game on the spot. Now, to me, this seems like the right kind of approach for your bannings. You don't want to go too heavy-handed. You want to stop the deck that is the problem, but at the same time, leave people the tools to build new decks. And the thing about Galvanic Relay here is, yes, it does have Storm. It lets you exile the top card of your library, and you can play those cards, but you have to pay their casting cost. So you're going to have one turn where you're going to be able to play a ton of stuff off the top of your deck, but you're going to need a bunch of mana and a plan to take advantage of it. And again, this is the pauper environment where there are not a lot of highly powered cards. So you have a scenario where, to me, I feel like this was the right choice. Galvanic Relay totally feels like it's not too powerful and could totally be left alone. Now, Affinity, this is the next part. We're going to be talking about the Sojourner's Companion Band. So, Affinity has been a slightly different case, in that from a pure win rate perspective, the metagame seemed to adapt successfully, with the most popular Grixis Affinity variants settling in at just under 50% non-mirror match win rates. That said, while Affinity was being kept in check by a small number of top decks, its win rate against many of the less represented decks was high. So basically, this deck doesn't do that well against the very top tier decks. However, when it comes to the lower tier decks, it just steamrolls them. That's how I'm interpreting this. So, it says, to open the metagame to more diversity, we're choosing to ban Sojourner's Companion. We considered other options, such as banning ATOG. Now, this has obviously been printed as a common as well. I just chose this artwork because, I don't know, it was because of the ability. It's more cleanly worded than it was back on the original printing, where it's like, activate this ability, but every time you do, you must sacrifice an artifact. Anyways, ATOG is 1 red and 1 for a 1/2, sack an artifact, ATOG gets +2/+2 until end of turn. On Dominaria, a scavenger. On Mirrodin, a predator. I love that. So the idea is like, oh, look, on Dominaria, he has to scrounge around. What artifacts can I eat? What can I get my hands on? But on Mirrodin, everything is dinner. Anything he eats fuels him. I do like the ATOGs. If you didn't know, ATOG, the name of it, is literally just scrambled up goat. You know how goats eat everything? They made this creature and went, it kind of eats everything. It'll eat tin cans and stuff, so we'll just take the word goat and scramble it up. And that's how you end up with ATOG. But the idea behind the ATOG is you cast a ton of artifacts, right? Like the Sojourner's Companion's free to put out. You put out a bunch of artifacts, you put out a bunch of artifact lands, you sack them all, and the ATOG becomes a big hulking beast that is difficult to deal with. So if they were to nerf that, then that would mess up the Affinity decks, because the Affinity decks use ATOG as a giant finisher. There was another option they had. They said they considered also banning Disciple of the Vault, and Disciple of the Vault is another piece that goes very well with things like the ATOG, right? Where basically Disciple of the Vault is 1 black to put out, a 1/1 human cleric. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So the idea with this is you would use it in conjunction with the ATOG. You would have it a bunch of artifacts, and each artifact you sacked would make the ATOG bigger, so you could swing in for a big hit, but also each artifact that went to your graveyard forces your opponent to lose a life. So the Disciple of the Vault is a very strong contender, I would say, for getting the ban hammer. It is a way to destroy your opponent that doesn't even require you winning through combat. Now, admittedly, in the pauper format, there's not as much insanity to go with Disciple of the Vault, but Disciple of the Vault has always been a powerful finisher. And it has such awesome artwork, man. I've always loved this stance of this, like, wizard. I always thought of him as a wizard. Sure, he's a cleric, but he's got that wizard feel to me, right? And you've got all this necrotic energy that is being drawn out of these artifacts into his body, and then he would just thrust his hand towards you and send that flowing into your body, and just like, losing life from it. It's so intense. I love it. Anyhow, they said, we considered other options such as ATOG or Disciple of Vault, but opted to preserve the unique gameplay style of the deck. banning Sojourner's Companion should lower the consistency and win rate of the deck without fundamentally changing the way it plays. That, to me, is a great way of doing bans, where you go, this deck is too strong, we take this piece out, the deck still works, but it doesn't work so well that it's a problem. So I give this ban a thumb up, all right? Next up, or not next up, I should say, next part of the statement is, we're aware that some players have voiced other potential metagame concerns that could result from Storm and Affinity being weakened, but due to the unique nature of the pauper card pool and complexity of the metagame, we've chosen to start with these two changes and observe and practice if further changes are needed, rather than try to predict and preempt cascading metagame changes. These pauper changes will be live later on today on Magic Online. So for me, I think that they've done this the right way. They haven't come in too heavy-handed. They've taken out cards that will clearly make a difference for the decks that they're played in without theoretically completely destroying both of these decks. Obviously, the Affinity deck is probably going to fare better from these bans. The Chatterstorm, I mean, what are you going to put in place of Chatterstorm, right? So that deck is getting hammered a little more hard. But I do like the fact that they're choosing to ban as few cards as possible and not try and figure out what the next step's going to be, because they don't always know. And the fewer amount of cards you ban, the more Magic cards people have to play with, and the more fun people will have overall. So, those are my thoughts on this banning. Let me know yours in the comments below if you feel like there's things that they definitely missed and should be included. If you liked the video, then like the video. If you love what I'm doing, join my Patreon. Big thanks to all my patrons, and I will see you, my friends, in the next video.